Hi, and welcome to our fifth edition of the BMES Interview with Industry, hosted by the Student Affairs Subcommittee. My name is Matthew Brown, and I'll be serving again as your moderator today. Again, I'm a fifth-year graduate student at the Mayo Clinic Graduate School in Biomedical Sciences, studying Biomedical Engineering. And I have the pleasure today to interview Anthony Santago, who's a senior scientist at MITRE, where he supports several programs across the DoD looking at understanding and modeling injuries and impairments associated with military hazards. Again, I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and please feel free to write in your questions within the chat box, and I'll be happy to ask Anthony for his perspective on your questions. So before we begin, I just give Anthony a chance to give a brief background on himself, his path to MITRE. Thanks, Anthony.
Yeah, thank you, Matt, and thank you for this opportunity. I started at NC State back in 2003 with an attempt to double major in computer science and mechanical engineering, and switched over to mechanical engineering. And while I was at NC State, I learned that typical mechanical engineering wasn't for me, and so I was exploring other options and realized that biomedical engineering and specifically biomechanics was the path of an interest for me. So following along that career path, I ended up at the Virginia Tech Wake Forest School of Biomedical Engineering and Sciences, where I was advised by Dr. Stefan Duma for my master's thesis, and then Dr. Kate Saul for my PhD work, looking at both injury biomechanics and movement biomechanics. I graduated with my PhD in 2015 and have been at MITRE. I've been at MITRE ever since, working on a myriad of projects.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that introduction. Just, let's start off, how did you get to MITRE? Can you describe, the process from, your work at Virginia Tech as a graduate student, or Virginia Tech Wake Forest as a graduate student, and moving to MITRE, and maybe that process?
So yeah, that's a great question. So Matt, unfortunately, I don't really have the best process. I was trying to explore a maybe tangential field. So I was looking at jobs at places like Fitbit and maybe Garmin and some things like that needed biomechanical expertise, but didn't necessarily know that they needed biomechanical expertise. And so I would write these really extensive cover letters explaining my skill sets. And as I was approaching graduation, my wife at the time was living in DC, and she said, "You need a job, you need to come to DC." And I was sent this opportunity and ended up applying and actually getting the job. So the process was a little bit of luck, a little bit of a lot of effort, perusing job sites and boards. But the interesting thing about the MITRE posting is that it was not just for biomechanics. It was for neuroscience. It was for general biomedical engineering. It was for I forgot exactly what the other thing on the listing was, but biomechanics was like a last option there. And so that's one of the things I just would like to point out, that they may think that they need this skill set, or at least the skill set that I was bringing at the time, or your skill set directly, but it may not directly align with the job that's being posted.
No, I think that's a really interesting story. So you briefly mentioned, sending cover letters to Fitbit and Garmin. Do you, kind of looking back, do you think, your cover letter was critical, or, played an important role in maybe getting an interview at MITRE or at some of these companies?
I do. I think it is very relevant to explain what it is that your skill set really brings to the table. I don't think a lot of industry that doesn't hire PhDs don't quite know what a PhD can do. They understand that you're now called doctor, and that's about the extent of it, but they don't understand that you've run a research project and that you've managed to publish all these papers, and that you've done all these other things that effectively mean leadership, or effectively mean technical skills that don't necessarily show up on a CV or a resume that you would submit. And so a cover letter is a great opportunity to actually show that ability. And I do think that it helped me with the MITRE job for sure.
And then, once you get into the interview, do you think, kind of really, describing and kind of elaborate on some of the skills and techniques that you learn as in a graduate setting in biomedical engineering are critical to kind of, as you said, like, show what a PhD can do, or what even a master's in biomedical engineering can do beyond, just the degree at the end of your name?
I do. MITRE is a little bit interesting in that we do actually hire a decent number of people out of graduate school. The company is about 65% advanced degree. So we actually have to give a job talk, and same with you would for like an academic job. So I had an hour-long presentation to give. But I thought in that you're giving the talk not to a group of academic peers in a sense. I'm not giving the talk to biomedical engineers. I think there was only one biomedical engineer in the audience, and so you have to give a much more general sense of your abilities and skill sets in your research than you would at a more targeted academic talk. And sometimes that's really challenging to get across. We have a tendency to stand up there and talk to our slides and talk about all of the gruesome details that we all love so much. And so keeping it more broad and general, I think was very helpful. And I've since seen other people that have interviewed that have done that have been show much better in their interview process than the ones that try to stay very specific.
Yeah, so maybe we can kind of talk a little bit more about that. So do you want to talk maybe just generally, or your opinion about pitfalls or kind of tips for people coming from an academic setting for interviewing for industry positions?
Yeah, I think that so the first pitfall is the use of acronyms. That just needs to leave the vocabulary when you walk into a presentation. I laugh all the time. Supporting the DoD, we just live in the sea of acronyms all the time. But the odds are that the people in your audience, the people that you're talking to, don't quite know what it is you worked on. They don't understand the nuances and the acronyms and all of the the things that we take for granted when we're nose deep in a pile of 100 papers. And so that's probably the biggest piece of advice I can offer people, is because once you remove those acronyms, you now have to raise yourself up a level, because you can't just repeat a 10-word like description all the time. And so it changes the way in which you present. It changes the way in which people show their slides, show the things as part of their presentation. I know that's really targeted, but I think it's very telling of a much larger kind of approach that people take when they're giving their presentations or interviewing in general.
Yeah. So you talk about how you have to present for the interview, and I'm sure there's a number of different interview formats. But I guess could you talk about maybe during the interview, but also while you're at MITRE, the importance of public speaking, being able to explain your work to maybe a diverse audience with different skill sets, and maybe whether your time in graduate school helped prepare you for that.
So we have a great term of art for this. We like to call it our sponsor face, our sponsor voice, and it's a way in which of speaking and talking and kind of gesturing that is targeted to a professional but more general audience. I think there were moments in graduate school that helped me with that. I think this is something that I've really had to learn on the job, and it's a skill set that I would say that many of the PhDs or many of the even masters or undergrads that I've seen interview straight out of school struggle with. I think I'm not big on just experience for experience sake, but this is something that is, when you start a job and you're surrounded by people that are interacting with either executives at your company or sponsors or other people out in industry, to watch and to learn and to take notes, and then to try and ingest those within your own personality and your own ability. It is it is something that people do struggle with coming straight out, and it's something that I think is absolutely a good on-the-job skill. Just to know that you're probably not very good at this yet, at least within the field that you've joined, and so it's worth watching other people around you. I think BMEs are really good for the most part, are good and set up at this because of the generality of the community. But I do think it's worth watching the people around you for sure.
No, I think that's very good insight. So kind of building on this, you talk a little bit about learning on the job. I think, at least in my experience in, my BME education, you hear a lot from industry folks that, once you get to your job, that there's a steep learning curve and a lot of the skills you pick up on the job. Do you want to comment on that? Is this true? What are some of the things that maybe you had to learn, and on the other side of it, maybe some of the skills that you wished you had or that you did have going into the, into this job that maybe helped you be successful?
That was a lot to unpack, Matt, so I'm going to try and take it one at a time.
Yeah, sorry, maybe we can just start with, in terms of, we can just start with,
no problem.
Sometimes my questions are a little long, I get a little excited. But, let's just start with, learning on the job. Is that true? And, what skills do you feel like you needed to learn when you got there that you didn't have?
So I think the comment about the public speaking and the way in which you engage with not only your peers internally, but the people that you're reporting to externally, whether it be sponsors or customers or, kind of depending on the job field, that's something that I think is very nuanced, and it's directly related to the company you work for and the people that you're interacting with external to the company. I would highly recommend that that is a skill that you should be prepared to pick up on the job, no matter what job that you take. The other thing that I would that was a little bit eye-opening for me is the writing styles are very different depending on the job that you're going to. In academia, unfortunately, we're taught a very dry writing style. These were our methods. These are our results. This is, the discussion. Here's one cool sentence that I was able to convince my advisor to let me put in the paper. But otherwise, it's very dry. It's very direct to the point. There's a lot of technical jargon, a lot of technical detail, and I think the writing and the presentation style since I've come to industry has changed drastically, more towards just literal minimal information, a lot of high-level ideas, and then waiting for people to ask me questions back. Because by the time that you get into industry, you're expected to know stuff. And so they're not people that are going to question you all of the time. If you provide a recommendation and you can support some of your points, they're not going to dive in real deep. So the way the interaction and the speaking and then the writing, I think, were the two kind of eye-opening things for me when I first started my job in terms of things that I've learned on the job.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good insight. So to the second part of the question, in terms of, your time, both as a master's student and as a PhD student, were there skills that you learned there or that, you developed there that really helped you kind of be successful right away at MITRE, or be successful so far?
Yeah, so I was, I guess you could call me lucky in some senses and unlucky in others. I did my master's program 2 years, and then I went and did a 5-year PhD in a fundamentally different field. And so I was able to take a lot of lessons learned from both fields. When you're stuck in one specific part of biomedical engineering, there's a tendency to do things a certain way because a lot of academics kind of flow from the same academic tree, and so there's a certain way and method and approach that people take. And so kind of translating across both of these fields helped me to distill out what was important, what wasn't important. And the other thing that I really appreciate, and I have to give a lot of kudos to my PhD advisor, Dr. Saul. She let me explore. So I had this incredible interest in sports analytics. And so she gave me the freedom and the flexibility to kind of probe at that interest. ended up even providing even some more context to like a new field, and actually ended up becoming a significant portion of my dissertation work. It's kind of a lesson learned that I was able to draw from that. And so, not that we all have time to do that in graduate school, but I would definitely recommend pursuing different kinds of interests, because it provides some additional context for the world around you that you don't necessarily get with a very kind of focused degree, whether it be undergraduate, master's, or PhD. Having that context can provide, it helps learn that the language and how you speak in your company, and how you write to the specific sponsors, because you have a lot of things to draw from.
Oh, I think that's really good advice. Something I've noticed too is the ability to kind of be cross-disciplinary and be creative, I think really is a big asset. So can you talk about your role now at MITRE? Are you working on one specific project? Do you work on multiple projects? Are you allowed to explore new areas? Maybe you can tell me just about a little bit, to summarize, can you tell me a little bit about just like your role at MITRE and so forth?
So that's a great question. I ask myself this question all the time. So we'll see what I come up with. But when I first started 5 years ago, I was delivering pure technical work. And so what do I mean by pure technical work? We had a problem. We called them sponsors, would come to MITRE and say, we need you to help us with X. And so the project lead and the task lead would come back to me and say, Anthony, we need you to do this piece of this particular task. And so I'd go into the literature and I'd pull information and I'd pick up the phone and I'd call some of my network, and I would, develop some PowerPoint presentations or a write-up of kind of what I learned, and then throw it over the fence to the project leadership. And we would trot off to the sponsor and give them our recommendations. I did that for about probably 6 months or so, and then I was given an opportunity to start leading some of these efforts. So I had people that were effectively reporting to me on the tasks where I would be kind of handing out this work, and I sort of started stepping away from more of the day-to-day type technical stuff, and some of the work that I did. I have slowly but surely progressed further and further away from the technical stuff, where I haven't opened up MATLAB in a year and a half, that kind of thing. Most of the work that I do now is program management, task management, sponsor interaction, senior leadership within MITRE interaction, and interestingly, I like it. It's a brand new skill set that I had to learn. So it provided that same sort of like thrill that I got from graduate school, learning something new, except it wasn't really academic. It was more business, social type oriented. And so most of my day, I know this sounds ridiculous, but most of my day is spent now sending emails and talking to people on the phone and making sure that we're making progress and that all the logistics and administrative duties are kind of lined up. The cool thing about the role that I have now is that I get to work with people. I get to bring people onto my projects that are cross-disciplinary. So I work with computer science experts, and I work with somebody that is an expert in computational imaging, and I work with somebody that's an expert in machine learning and artificial intelligence. And so we have this giant project that we're kind of all pushing towards together, and so I get to learn a lot about the new science and things from them that I wouldn't otherwise had I kind of stayed in this pure technical role. So to answer your last question, Ryan, I am on somewhere between 4 and 6 projects at a time. That's high. Typically, people at MITRE are on 2 to 3. That's just kind of the nature of the work that I have right now.
So kind of building on that, how do you, what are your kind of, what are your suggestions in terms of, or what are your strategies to kind of manage such a a team with such integrated and, different skill sets?
I do a lot of listening. I put a problem out into the world, and then I give people the flexibility to solve it in the way that they want to solve it. And so what that means, though, is that the people that come onto the team have to be able to produce kind of independently, which I think we all hear like a lot about independent production the way that I have managed things. I've been very lucky in a lot of ways. The people on the teams that I've been managing are just phenomenal, and so I haven't really had to like dive in and do what like micromanage, where you weren't answering the question, so I'm going to narrow down the scope, and so I've kind of given them the freedom to pursue these problems as they want, and it's provided much more creative solutions and much more or much better results than we would have otherwise. Does that answer your question?
Okay.
I think I may have taken a little bit of
there. Completely. Yeah, no. I think that's perfect. So I just kind of want to build on kind of the environment at MITRE. So I learned that MITRE has been recognized for a lot of their efforts to promote diversity and inclusion in STEM. They were named, for example, a top 10 employer for diversity in engineering. So can you maybe talk a little bit about how working in an inclusive environment has shaped your work as an engineer and, as a manager and leader?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And actually my my division director, so I'm in a department in the division, has a couple of departments. I sent an email about this today. So I'm going to put this out in the world. I may say things here that are upsetting. I'm not trying to. I just don't know yet. And so in terms of how to effectively talk about all this. And so the one thing that I do want to say about working in an environment like that is the encouragement to communicate and open up this line of communications and talk about these hard things. And it's very freeing in that way. In a sense that I can go and I can ask some of my coworkers, look, I don't know how to deal with this situation. Can you please help me? Or, I understand that you have experienced some problems. Can you explain them to me so that I can make sure that I can think about this? Or I know that you have experienced bias, or, so can you help me understand exactly what shape that took so that I can manage, I can, be on the lookout for that when I'm managing these programs and kind of understanding. And a really good example of this is in letters of recommendation. I did some reading when I was in graduate school, and since I've come to MITRE and talking to some of my colleagues, and I know this is super simplistic, but letters of recommendation for males have a tendency to focus on technical skills, and letters of recommendation for females have a tendency to focus on soft skills. And so this is something that is problematic, because when you read a letter of recommendation, you're looking for, does this person have technical capability, not like, are they kind and respectful? And so this is something that I have known that this happens, and so I've been able to reach out to my colleagues and say, look, I'm concerned. I may have done this inappropriately. Can you please read this document? Can you please talk to me about how to best, provide something simple as a letter of recommendation for an undergrad? So I know that was a long, kind of rambling sort of remark, but suffice it to say that the biggest thing that I take away, and the big thing that I really appreciate about MITRE, is the willingness to have these open lines of communication and to actually talk about these things, and to see and to promote the necessity of diversity. I greatly appreciate it, and being reminded about this daily helps me to continue to consider those things, whether I'm building a project team or hiring somebody to come onto the company. It's a really
thank you.
Really
I think that was but I think that's a very thoughtful answer, and I really appreciate you sharing, your experience at MITRE. I'm just going to kind of follow up. So, individuals on your team, how can they promote diversity? You talked a lot about, listening, continuing to have these conversations to promote inclusion and diversity within engineering and biomedical engineering. You want to, talk a little bit more about that, or, what you think we can do to promote diversity?
You mean within members of my team, or just kind of in general?
Either way you want to go with the question. If you want to talk about within your team at MITRE, or just within generally in the BME workplace.
So, yeah, I think I'm probably better suited to talk specifically about the local aspect of this. I don't have a broader sense within MITRE just because I'm not at that level. In addition to the communication, which I think is just 100% necessary, and I have a philosophy as a leader on my team, which is my job is to knock down all of the walls for you and then get out of the way and let you execute. And so by doing that, I'm hopeful that me and some of the other members of the leadership of these teams can promote communication and diversity of thought and things like that are helpful when not only in the success of the project, but in also like bringing new people onto the team with new ideas and new thoughts and with diverse backgrounds, because we are so open to these. We are already open to the creativity and the different life experiences that the other people are bringing to the project team that we wouldn't have otherwise. And so, this is something that I'm on the lookout for, to make sure that the team members are also communicating effectively and interacting with one another and, accepting of new people that are coming onto the team. But by promoting that diversity from the top down, from the very, very top of MITRE all the way down, you can really see it taking shape at these project levels. And so, once again, just to reemphasize, I think communication is so key here. People opening their mouths and talking about these things and exploring it. And then also just the understanding that, like, my idea is not the best idea all the time. And promoting that diversity of thought, which is going to require, different backgrounds, different genders, different lifestyles, just different locations. I mean, any of the things that promote diversity.
Yeah, thank you. No, thank you. I really appreciate your perspective from industry and a leadership position in industry on these this important topic. So I'm just gonna switch gears for a little bit in the interview, and just to kind of talk about some of your other experiences, and then maybe we'll kind of see where that takes us. So I read that you did some internships early on, both at Cook Medical and at Sony Ericsson. Maybe I know probably it was a long time ago, but maybe you could just talk about the value to you of those internship experiences, and maybe the keys to kind of, one, making the most out of those experiences, and two, just getting your foot in the door. So I guess the first question would be, just tell me about your internship experiences.
Yeah, so NC State was very big into co-oping, which I know a lot of other engineering schools are. And so I was given an opportunity to co-op. And so for those of you who don't know what co-oping is, you effectively take off a semester of school and go to work. And then so for example, if I worked in the fall, I'd come back to school in the spring. I'd work in the summer. I'd come back to school in the fall, and I'd finish up my co-op in the spring. So you effectively get 12 months at the company. And so I started my co-op with Sony Ericsson doing actual cell phone testing and design. And just to kind of date myself a little bit, we were in the process of stress testing a new flip phone to determine how many flips the phone could take before it would actually break the circuitry. So the cool thing about that experience was, well, one, I got to go work in industry and got to understand like what a for-profit company was for. But the other thing that it did was to tell me that, like, I didn't want to do this. I had no interest in designing cell phones for a living. And I kind of extrapolated that to just general product design, general, like, sort of R&D type or just product design. And so from there, I went to Cook because I had started getting into the biomedical world, and specifically into biomechanics, doing some undergraduate research there at NC State. And, I enjoyed Cook. I thought it was a great company to work for, and, I liked the people that I was interacting with. But once again, I wanted something more than what was happening there. And what that more was is that I wanted to do research. And I wanted to do research at a real fundamental level. And I think as an extension of that, I wanted to run my own research. I wanted to be in charge of a research activity, and I just couldn't do that with a bachelor's degree. I needed a master's or a PhD in order to do that. And so I know that this is weird and strange, but the best thing about my internships was learning the things that I didn't like, and then being able to identify those later in jobs and other things, and be able to look out for those things that I knew that I didn't like and focus on other things.
So, to your point, it kind of gave you some perspective on, the path you would take. And I know at the beginning you mentioned that you actually switched from, a mechanical focus to a biomedical focus. Did your internships help, that transition? Or, and then, the second question would be, what would you tell someone if, who's listening, who, maybe in biomedical, and, they want to, let's say they're, for example, in biomechanics, but they're, they do an internship and they're not, very excited about it, and maybe they want to do biomaterials. What advice would you give to somebody who maybe wants to switch their area of emphasis?
So to answer your first question, internships did kind of shape my direction in biomedical engineering. The mechanical engineering internship that I did, and the other people that I were talking to that had mechanical engineering internships, were the work that they were describing to me was not really of high interest to me. And so that kind of pushed me into the biomedical world. So just to wrap that up, the advice that I would give for somebody that's looking to switch is to go around and talk to their friends and professors and people they know in industry or people they know in academia that are pursuing these things, to give themselves a better sense of exactly like what it is that's happening. I thought biomechanics for a long time was just device manufacturing, and it turns out it's substantially bigger than that. I mean, I'm still learning aspects of biomechanics, and I've been in this field now for 15 years. Like cellular biomechanics is not something that I even touch. And so, I'm constantly, so just alluding back to the people kind of looking to switch or looking to kind of understand a different area, or maybe they don't like the current area. My recommendation is to explore. If you can get a research, an undergraduate research position for a couple hours a week in that field, that's really helpful. If you can become good friends with a faculty member that's in that field and talk to them about it, that's really helpful. Just kind of understanding what's out there and understanding your options, I think is probably the best piece of advice that I could give. I kind of just explored until I found something that I liked, and just kept poking and poking and poking. And so yeah, that's the advice that I would give. That's the advice that I would give.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fantastic advice. I can say that personally, I've had a similar experience in terms of trying to find your place in in biomedical engineering or engineering in general. So you briefly mentioned talking about undergraduate research. Do would you someone who's, let's say someone's interested in just going to industry, maybe after a master's or right from college, do you think that that's a valuable experience relative to maybe a co-op?
I think if you're leaving undergrad and your plan is to go directly into industry, my recommendation would be to pursue industry internships over an undergraduate research activity. The on-the-job training that you pick up and the exposure is just too great of something to kind of leave behind and pursue research. If you're not quite sure you're interested in going into a master's or PhD, then I think it's worth potentially pursuing both. Maybe you do the undergraduate research during the year. Maybe you can pick it up as like an elective if your university offers that for you. NC State, I actually got class credit for doing my undergraduate research. That actually went towards my degree. So if your university offers that, I would highly consider that. And then maybe in the summer or even over winter break, going and working for a company and as an intern. There's a lot of value in both. I think you learn a lot when you're doing research about how to ask questions appropriately that you really wouldn't know otherwise. if you're looking to go directly into industry, that industry experience is just too valuable to give up for undergraduate research. Once again, that's totally Anthony's opinion.
Yeah. And the last question on this kind of train of questions is, I know you went from undergraduate to a master's and then a master's to a PhD. You know, if you could go back and do it again, would you do undergraduate to a PhD? I know you talked about you really enjoyed your PhD experience, but, do you think the master's was necessary? Do you think you learned skills? Did you mature during that time?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I definitely matured as an adult during my master's, in understanding what it was going to take to do this thing that is graduate school. The other thing that I didn't know is I didn't know that I wanted to stay for a PhD. As I alluded to earlier, I've sort of kind of just taken the next opportunity that was in front of me. It just so happened that, the next opportunity after my master's was a PhD, so I ended up taking it. But I didn't quite know that that's what I wanted. And so I think that if you're not quite sure, I think getting a master's is just fine, especially if you're the person you go to do your master's with, your advisor is open to letting you stay if you don't know. And I think faculty deal with this all of the time, people showing up in graduate school and just not quite knowing what it is they want to be doing. And I think they're willing to, to help you and help you understand and help you progress in that way. So I liked my master's, but if you know that you want to go and be a faculty member somewhere and you know that you want to stay for your PhD, then I would highly just recommend going directly for the PhD. But many of us, myself included, didn't know that when I started.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice. As someone in graduate school. So just pivoting here, 5 years later, right?
Right.
So as just pivoting, as you may know, the BMES 2020 conference is going virtual this year, which is very exciting. But a lot of students use the conference as an opportunity to network, both for graduate opportunities as well as some industry opportunities. So maybe maybe you can comment on one, your approach to networking, and two, any tips you have for virtual networking.
So I can start with the first one. I will think about the virtual networking as I'm kind of talking through this other thing. I think the answer is going to be I don't have a lot of tips, but I do have some potential suggestions that have been beneficial to me. But regarding the networking, one of the best things that I liked about graduate school specifically was that the environment that you find yourself in is not just a head down in the lab with 6 people surrounding you. There's a lot of other stuff going on and a lot of other students that are doing things. And so I made a real point to try and engage with the other students in the biomedical engineering program to both in terms of friendly and in terms of like a professional way. What is it you're working on? What is it that you're doing? What is it that that's going on? And that, for me, has been the absolute best network. And not only has it allowed me to reach back out to them for questions and considerations and concerns and understanding what's going on in the community, but it's also provided me connections through them to other people that I wouldn't have known otherwise. And so especially for graduate students, I would get to know the people in your lab well, get to know the people outside of your lab well, get to know as many of the faculty as you can well, because that's going to be the best opportunity for you to network moving forward, is that reach back. So at least that's been, at least in my experience. The virtual networking, I don't quite know. I don't have a good answer. Cold emailing is hard. if you're going to do stuff like that, you really need to target it to the faculty member or the industry person of interest. I know that you're working on X. I am interested in X because of, A, B, and C. Not just, these cold, hey, I'm so-and-so, I go here. I'm, interested in talking to you more about what's going on. That's probably a much better approach, the targeted approach, than kind of this more general. I am really interested to see how BMES does this virtual conference and virtual networking. I am curious as to kind of see how this goes, because I think it could be incredibly beneficial. Everybody's on a Zoom call together around 3 or 4 posters, and maybe that you can start up some one-on-one conversations, like in a side room or something. I don't know. It's a great question. If you figure out the answer, Matt, please let me know.
Yeah.
So I can share it with others.
Sorry, I guess that was. Yeah, no, I think we're all in this, in this COVID era, struggling with this question. I just wanted your perspective on it. Kind of talking about cold emails. I know a lot of people utilize LinkedIn to try to network.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what your experience with LinkedIn is, your thoughts on LinkedIn, its importance to getting a job.
So I don't use LinkedIn personally. I have a LinkedIn account, but I don't use it to interact. But I have a lot of colleagues that do, and they very much enjoy the engagement and the interaction via LinkedIn. It has been successful in allowing them to kind of engage across the community. One good example of that are the people that I work with. I work with a lot of AAAS fellows. For those of you who are interested in doing something kind of different after graduate school, I would highly recommend looking into the AAAS fellowship. So they have LinkedIn pages and LinkedIn groups, and so we've actually gotten a lot of our hires out of those LinkedIn groups that they've been able to interact with. And so I think it's a great opportunity. I think people are open and willing to add you to their networks and things. At least that's been my experience. So I think it's a really good forum for that, at least in the limited exposure that I've had to it.
No, I think that's really good insight. We have about 5 minutes left. I will say that for everyone who's on the call, please keep an eye out for BMES's upcoming events, including our next interview with industry announcement. So kind of, to wrap up the interview, and I really appreciate your time today, Anthony, can you just talk about, what it's been like, working at MITRE since March, in this, COVID era, working remotely, maybe some of the challenges initially, how you've adapted, some strategies from working from home?
So I want to make a comment. This isn't necessarily MITRE specific, but more general. As y'all on the call and whoever's watching this video later are looking for jobs, I would highly recommend asking the company how they handled COVID. I have been fortunate in that MITRE was one of the very first companies in the greater Washington, D.C. area, and we have a headquarters in Boston as well, to send everybody home. And so I've been working remote since March. I still have colleagues that the company has never actually made a formal policy, like they're forcing them to take vacation if they can't get their job done, like they're forcing them to come in. And so I think this is really telling of the company culture and the kind of the way in which they treat their employees. And I definitely would recommend asking about that because I think it shows on the leadership at large. In terms of my experience, it's been an unbelievable struggle. My wife and I both have jobs, and we have a little one at home. And so we effectively now have 3 jobs. We have childcare plus her job plus my job. And so it's been a real challenge that I know that I'm not the only one. I have a colleague that has 3 children under the age of 6 at home. And so, that's substantially more challenging than what I'm dealing with. But it's a real challenge in getting your work in and communicating and understanding that things are going to get a little slower now because of communication. Because some people work in the morning, some people work during the day, and some people work at night. So so the communication flow is just a little bit slower. So that's been something that I've had to adapt to. But it's a real struggle. It's going to be a struggle for at least another 6 months, if not longer. But the one thing I can say is that I've maintained good communication with my colleagues. I've maintained good good relationships with the people that I need to report to externally, and so that has helped everybody kind of understand the position that I found myself in. Is your question, Ryan?
No, thank you. I really, yeah.
Matt, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. No, you're fine. Yeah, no, thank you very much, Anthony. I almost called you Ryan. I just want to thank everyone for joining us. Yeah, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Really appreciate you, Anthony, for giving us your perspective, both from your time at NC State all the way through Wake Forest and now at MITRE. And we hope to see you at the next interview for industry. Goodbye.
No, absolutely, and thank you for this opportunity. I greatly appreciate it. Y'all feel free to contact me via LinkedIn. I do get messages from LinkedIn and do respond to this despite my lack of normal usage. So please don't hesitate to reach out via that. I'm happy to help and answer questions as I'm able.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Anthony. Appreciate your